Welcome to True Crime Case Resolution, where we delve into the most harrowing and twisted tales of crime, unraveling the dark secrets hidden behind seemingly ordinary lives. In this episode, we uncover the tragic and unsettling story of two couples whose seemingly peaceful lives in the quaint town of Chase City, Virginia, were shattered by an obsession that spiraled out of control, leading to the gruesome murder of an innocent woman. This is the story of Jones and Janice, and Martinez and Susan Thomas, friends turned foes in a case that would leave the entire region reeling. Chase City, nestled in the heart of Virginia, was the epitome of small-town America, where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a gentle pace. For Jones and Janice, a married couple in their late 30s, and their close friends, Martinez and Susan Thomas, life was predictable, perhaps even mundane. Both couples were well respected in the community, attending local events and social gatherings together, forming what many would describe as a perfect friendship. Behind the facade of this idyllic friendship, however, lay a secret that only the four of them shared, a consensual wife-swapping arrangement that had added a spark of excitement to their otherwise routine lives. Initially, the arrangement was met with mutual understanding and respect. It was an unspoken agreement that what happened between the couples stayed between the couples. The thrill of this newfound excitement invigorated their relationships, making the once boring routine feel electrifying. However, what began as a harmless exploration of desires soon turned into something far more dangerous. Jones, an otherwise ordinary man with a stable job and a calm demeanor, found himself increasingly drawn to Jennifer. The connection he felt with her was unlike anything he had experienced before, and what started as simple admiration quickly grew into an all-consuming obsession. He began to crave her presence, longing for the moments they could steal away together. As his fixation deepened, his behavior started to change, becoming more erratic and unpredictable. Janice, sensing the shift in her husband, grew concerned but was too caught up in the thrill of their arrangement to fully grasp the gravity of the situation. Susan, on the other hand, began to feel the strain of the arrangement. While the initial excitement had been alluring, she started to notice Jones's unsettling behavior. His constant need for attention, the way he would stare at her when he thought no one was looking, and the subtle yet persistent attempts to isolate her from Martinez, all pointed to something more sinister. Uneasy, she confided in Martinez, expressing her desire to end the arrangement. Martinez, ever the supportive husband, agreed, but they both knew it would not be an easy conversation with Jones and Janice. When Susan finally mustered the courage to speak to Jones about ending the arrangement, his reaction was far from what she expected. Instead of understanding, Jones became desperate, pleading with her not to end things between them. His obsession had taken root deep within him, and the thought of losing her drove him to the brink of madness. Susan, determined to distance herself from the increasingly unhinged Jones, stood her ground, but it was clear that this was far from over. The tension between the couples grew palpable, with Martinez and Susan gradually distancing themselves from Jones and Janice. Social gatherings that once brought joy now felt strained, and the once solid friendship began to fracture under the weight of Jones's growing obsession. Janice, though aware of her husband's feelings, found herself trapped between loyalty to Jones and a creeping sense of dread about what might happen next. As the days turned into weeks, Jones's behavior grew more erratic. He would show up unannounced at Susan's workplace, leave cryptic messages on her phone, and even lurk outside her home at odd hours. Susan, increasingly fearful for her safety, confided in Martinez, who urged her to go to the police. But in a small town like Chase City, where everyone knew everyone, Susan hesitated, hoping that Jones would eventually come to his senses. Then, one fateful evening, the situation escalated beyond anyone's worst fears. Susan, who had been taking a bath, was startled by a noise in her home. She called out for Martinez, thinking he had returned from running errands, but there was no response. Before she could react, Jones burst into the bathroom, his face a mask of desperation and rage. In that moment, all the fear Susan had harbored came crashing down as she realized the full extent of Jones's obsession. In a fit of uncontrollable fury, Jones attacked Susan, his hands closing around her throat as he forced her under the water. The struggle was brief but brutal, and within moments, Susan's life was snuffed out, her body left floating lifelessly in the tub. Jones, panting and drenched in sweat, stood over her, the horrifying reality of what he had done slowly dawning on him. Panicked, Jones knew he needed to cover up the crime. He called Janice, who arrived at the scene in a state of shock. Seeing Susan's lifeless body, Janice's initial instinct was to flee, but Jones, consumed by a twisted sense of self-preservation, convinced her that they needed to hide the evidence. Driven by a loyalty to her husband and a fear of the consequences, Janice reluctantly agreed. The couple hastily concocted a plan to stage Susan's death as an accident, scrubbing the bathroom clean and arranging her body to make it appear as though she had slipped and drowned. But despite their frantic efforts, there were too many loose ends, too many inconsistencies that would ultimately unravel their web of lies. When Martinez returned home and discovered Susan's body, his world was shattered. The police were called and an investigation was launched. Initially, the death was treated as a tragic accident, but as the detectives dug deeper, suspicions began to arise. The inconsistencies in Jones's and Janice's accounts of the evening, coupled with the forensic evidence that pointed to foul play, led the investigators to suspect that something far more sinister had occurred. As the investigation progressed, the pressure began to mount on Jones and Janice. The police, now convinced that Susan's death was no accident, started to close in, piecing together the timeline and identifying the discrepancies in the couple's stories. The once tight-knit community of Chase City was left in shock as the dark secrets of the seemingly ordinary couples were exposed for all to see. As the police investigation progressed, the inconsistencies in Jones's and Janice's stories became impossible to ignore. What initially appeared to be a tragic accident was now clearly something far more sinister. The detectives assigned to the case were seasoned professionals, and they knew that the truth had a way of revealing itself, no matter how carefully it was buried. The evidence was mounting against Jones. The bruises on Susan's neck that were inconsistent with a simple fall, the absence of any water in her lungs, suggesting she was already dead when placed in the tub, and the frantic, almost desperate attempts by Jones and Janice to clean the scene. Under the mounting pressure of the investigation, Jones began to crack. He had always been a man of routine, someone who thrived on control and predictability. But now, his world was spiraling out of control, and the walls were closing in. He became increasingly paranoid, convinced that the police were watching his every move, that his neighbors were whispering about him behind his back. The once confident and composed man was now a shadow of his former self, haunted by the knowledge of what he had done. Janice, too, was struggling under the weight of her guilt. She had always been the more emotionally resilient of the two, able to compartmentalize her feelings and keep a calm exterior. But the reality of her involvement in Susan's murder was eating away at her. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw Susan's lifeless body floating in the tub. The nightmares were relentless, a constant reminder of the terrible act she had helped cover up. The breaking point came when the police brought both Jones and Janice in for questioning separately. The strategy was simple: isolate them, apply pressure, and watch as their stories diverged. And diverge they did. Under intense scrutiny, Janice's resolve began to falter. The detectives played on her guilt, subtly suggesting that Jones had manipulated her, that she was just as much a victim as Susan. It was a risky tactic, but it paid off. After hours of questioning, Janice finally broke down. She couldn't keep up the facade any longer. Through sobs and gasps, she confessed to her role in the crime. She detailed how Jones had murdered Susan in a fit of rage and how she had helped him cover it up out of fear and a misguided sense of loyalty. It was a confession that would seal their fate, but it was also a relief for Janice, a way to finally unburden herself from the guilt that had been consuming her. With Janice's confession in hand, the police arrested Jones and charged him with first-degree murder. Janice was also charged, but with a lesser offense of obstruction of justice, given her role in the cover-up. The news of their arrest sent shockwaves through Chase City. The community, which had once admired the couples, now recoiled in horror as the grisly details of the crime were made public. The story dominated the local news, and as word spread, it became a regional sensation. The trial that followed was one of the most closely watched in Virginia's history. The courtroom was packed every day, with members of the public, journalists, and even those who had once considered Jones and Janice friends, all eager to see how the drama would unfold. The prosecution's case was strong, built on a foundation of forensic evidence, Janice's confession, and the testimonies of those who had witnessed Jones's increasingly erratic behavior in the days leading up to the murder. Martinez, the man who had lost his wife to this twisted tragedy, was a constant presence in the courtroom. His grief was palpable, but so was his determination to see justice served. He sat through every testimony, every piece of evidence, his eyes fixed on Jones, who now appeared as a man defeated, his once confident demeanor replaced with a hollow stare. The defense, on the other hand, tried to paint Jones as a man driven to madness by an uncontrollable obsession. They argued that his actions, while horrific, were the result of a mental break, not premeditated intent. But the jury saw, through this defense, the evidence was clear. Jones had murdered Susan in cold blood, driven by a deadly combination of obsession and rejection. After days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Jones was found guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Janice, who had cooperated with the investigation and shown genuine remorse for her actions, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for obstruction of justice. It was a lighter sentence than many expected, but the judge took into account her confession and the role Jones had played in manipulating her. For Martinez, the verdict was a bittersweet victory. Justice had been served, but it could never bring back the woman he loved. The life they had planned together, the future they had dreamed of, was gone forever. He found some solace in knowing that those responsible for Susan's death would pay for their crimes, but the pain of her loss would never fully heal. In the aftermath of the trial, Chase City struggled to move on from the darkness that had engulfed it. The community, once so close-knit, was now divided by suspicion and mistrust. The scandal had exposed the secrets and lies that lurked beneath the surface of its seemingly perfect facade, and the town would never be the same. Jones and Janice faded into obscurity, their names forever tainted by the crime they had committed. For the residents of Chase City, the story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that the darkness of the human soul could lurk behind even the most ordinary of lives. As we close this chapter on true crime case resolution, we're left to ponder the tragic consequences of unchecked desire and the lengths to which some will go to satisfy their darkest impulses. The story of Jones, Janice, Martinez, and Susan Thomas is one that will linger in the minds of those who hear it, a stark reminder of the thin line between fantasy and obsession, and how easily it can be crossed with devastating results. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the heart of one of Virginia's most shocking crimes. Be sure to subscribe to True Crime Case Resolution for more in-depth explorations of the darkest corners of the human psyche. Until next time, stay safe and always be aware of the secrets that might be